Firstly, I would like to start off by thanking OMS for all of their support. I'm fortunate to be a recipient of the 2025 OMS Scholarship to support my research studying spalting pigments and the way we can apply them in the modern day. I encountered a great many challenges during my research that made it difficult to complete online trials. So thankfully, with OMS's support, I was able to complete my data collection, and I'm excited to share some of those results with you tonight. This presentation will cover my research studying pigmentation of 3 species of spalting fungi across variable media types. Spalting fungi are a pretty small group of fungi, and the group of people who knows about them is even smaller. So I do ask you some questions at the very end, and I might answer them a little later. Starting off, what are spalting fungi and what makes them so cool? Spalting fungi are a group of wood decay fungi that alter the color of their substrate either through the removal or the addition of pigments. And they can be classified into one of 3 groups based on this fact. First, we have our white rot fungi. These fungi remove the brown component in wood and leave behind a light-colored sugary residue. The ability to remove this brown component, known as lignin, is unique to white rot fungi, and as such, you're typically going to find white rot on its own as it's one of the first major decomposers of wood. One type of white rot fungi are zoolite producers. These produce a melanized barrier where 2 colonies of fungi meet. Typically, these will be the colonies of 2 competing fungi, though occasionally some of our zoolite producers, such as Chinese versicolor, the turkey tail fungus, as well as Scytalidium polymorpha, the dead man's finger fungus, will produce these between boundaries of their own colony. They're made of melanin, a large, heavyweight, complex molecule that makes these barriers effectively impenetrable. Typically, these zoolites are black, though they can occasionally be red, orange, yellow, light brown, or even green, depending on the other fungus that they are covered with. Lastly are our soft rotting fungi. These decay with light-colored sugars that are easier to degrade than the white fungi leave behind. They're known for depositing colorful metabolites into their substrate, and these metabolites, rather than melanin, they don't act like a physical barrier. They act as a toxin that allows them to reserve the food source for themselves, fighting off competition and helping with other biological diseases such as desiccation, UV exposure, and biological attack disease. All of these fungi are incredible and they're worth checking out, but for the sake of this presentation, I will be focusing on our soft fungus. What's remarkable about soft rot fungi is the pigments they produce, and they produce quite a range. At the top, we see the range that are allowed. This is for just 3 species of spalting fungi: Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked, Scytalidium adenoma, and of course, Borea aeruginosa, suns, which are 2 very significant species. Typically, these pigments are going to be applied in their extractive form. They are applied superficially to wood products such as wood-turned items or veneers to create a dye or complex pattern. They can also be applied to textiles or paper to help dye them. Recently, we have also been using the solidified purified in our biotechnology applications. At the bottom is Dromeda, the red crystal produced by the fungus Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked. It is remarkably stable, and it is excellent for its uses in our optoelectronic devices, in thin films such as those that we see in the bottom. As well, the pigment from Borea silent has also been used in this application, as large size, giving it semi-conductive properties. Today, spalting pigments are a pretty obscure media. However, they have a very rich history, dating all the way back to the mid-1400s in Italy. Traditionally, whole pieces of spalted wood were foraged from the forest, cut up into thin slices, and used in intarsia and marquetry techniques. These techniques combined thin slices of differently colored wood to make complex images. Due to the rarity of spalting, it was typically reserved to the upper classes, and it peaked in popularity around the mid to late 1600s in the German-speaking parts of Western Europe as well as Scandinavia, which is where some of the most iconic examples of spalting come from. Shown here is the ambassadors in the Spanish royal monastery that was produced in the mid-1600s, originally in Augsburg, in what is now France. However, by the early 1800s, spalting fungi, as well as the intarsia and marquetry techniques that they were using, began to fall out of popularity. and in 1856, the introduction of the first synthetic dye that makes these artificial colorants very quickly overtake the use of natural pigments, including those produced by Spalting fungi. It wouldn't be to the 1930s when the American steel would adopt Spalting wood that was often discarded by the lumber industry due to its inferior structural properties and turn them into works of art meant to be coveted with perspective and appreciated the way that they were 500 years prior. This gained momentum and continued in popularity through the 60s and 70s and remains popular today in woodworks and woodwork spaces. And in the 1990s, we saw modern Spalting research evolve. Here, we have the development of standardized extraction methods to extract the pigments from their wood substrates. As well, we saw the characterization of two of our most important compounds produced by these fungi, xylem by Chlorisophoria and Dromedal by Scytalidium. So we have these pigments, they're pretty cool, but we do have a wide range of synthetic colorants that are currently used. They're cheap and easy to produce. They can be easily mixed to produce any color you could possibly imagine. And most importantly, we already have the infrastructure to produce them. It brings up the question, these are really cool pigments, but do they really justify all the trouble that we take to not only develop and manufacture facilities that can produce these at a scale large enough to compete with synthetic dyes, but also developing research and quality control testing methods that would ensure the compliance with local regulations and ensure that they can actually work on a variety of substrates that synthetic dyes are commonly found on. These are very real questions and real challenges that we are facing as we move towards natural pigments. But the reason why we should ultimately be moving towards them is that these pigments we commonly use are at the end of the day synthetic. They are plastic and they're always going to be. They are derived from petrochemicals, coal, and minerals such as cobalt, nickel, and copper. They are non-renewable and by definition not sustainable. And their sourcing is associated with the same harmful pests that oil and mineral extraction cause, destroying ecosystems worldwide and releasing carbon at rates that are difficult for us to combat. And their harm doesn't just stop at sourcing, as their application is typically very water and energy intensive. Looking at the textile industry, a major consumer of these dyes, to get these pigments to adhere to the substrate, it requires that they not only use a lot of water, but they also require the use of a mordant, typically synthetic or derived by enzymes such as chrome. These, along with the remnants of these synthetic pigments, are carried into the water, as well as the chemicals of these fabrics are treated with, and they are discarded into local waterways. They make their way into marine and terrestrial sediments where they settle, and they bioaccumulate in marine organisms, eventually making their way and reaching to us. As well, paints, especially those exposed to weathering, such as exterior paints, fencing, decking, and housing, as well as vehicle paints, can chip off tiny particles. And these are incredibly persistent and resistant to decay. These are a huge and hugely overlooked source of microplastic, with some estimates placing them as high as 58% of all marine microplastics. It is exactly their persistence and their resistance to decay that allows them to remain in our water and our sediments, which we have a very limited ability to remove right now. It's extremely important that we are not only looking to mitigate the harm that these have done, but also looking to replace them as soon as possible to prevent any further harm from their use. The great thing about Spalting pigments is that they have shown very low biological toxicity, and they also do not require any water, nor do they require mordants to adhere to the substrates, at least those tested so far, paper, wood, and textiles. So we know that Spalting fungi have the incredible potential to replace synthetic dyes in a wide variety of industries. But the question we're still trying to figure out is how do we actually do so? Traditionally, malt extract agar and potato dextrose agar are the standard meat sources that you will use to cultivate fungi in the laboratory. However, these are excellent because they easily provide the nutrients that are needed to allow this fungi to thrive. When we're looking for pigmentation, we're looking for a sort of stress response that reduces the production of these metabolites that are going to allow these fungi to thrive. One factor that we know has a pretty big influence on not only production but pigment color is pH. We see that from this chart produced by Tudor et al. 2013. It tested 9 different species of spalting fungi, including white rot and soft rot fungi, from pHs of 2 to 8. And we can see that there's quite a wide variety, not only in the pigment intensity, but in the pigment color. This is a pretty common phenomenon when we're talking about natural pigments. Any gardeners here might add things like coffee grounds or lime juice to the soil hydrangea bushes. It can change the flowers from pink to that iconic purple or blue color. That's because things like lime juice are acidic. They change the pH of the soil and affect the plant's ability to obtain nutrients such as illuminate, which changes the colors of their petals. This is similar in fungi. We see this exact same phenomenon, and a great genus to look at is Scytalidium. 3 species of Scytalidium were chosen for this project due to their prevalence, their incredible fast and their wide range of colors. Now that we have our question down, let's look at the fungi themselves. Starting off with Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked, this is our red-producing fungus. Under acidic conditions, in pH value of around 0 to 7, it will produce a red or yellow crystal. This gives us an incredibly vibrant and very stable red pigment that is commonly used in our optoelectronics research, as well as in the dyes that we have here. However, on a basic scale, when the pH gets around 8 or higher, it can produce a blue crystal instead. The 2 strains that our lab had were tested for this to see if there were any major discrepancies between the 2. As a strain represents a unique genetic individual of a species, examining if we see any differences that are correlated to a specific strain could help give us information on whether the results we're seeing are specific to that strain or if it may be species-wide. Next, we have Scytalidium ganodermoptera. This, as its name suggests, is parasitic on Ganoderma mushrooms, also known as reishi. They're known for causing a bright yellow stain, though they are also known for producing colors in the ranges of purple based on the pH of their media, as well as the age of the culture. Lastly, we have Scytalidium lignicola. This is known for producing a gray pigment. It can be found creating lignin-rich substrates or causing a dark blue rot on citrus or manioc plants. The pigment produced by Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked has been characterized. However, those produced by Scytalidium ganodermoptera and Scytalidium lignicola have yet to be described. To examine the pigmentation, this experiment consisted of 3 parts. First, we examined growth and pigmentation on the media. The transparency of this media, as well as its standardized use, gives us a preliminary results that allow us to see how they each individually perform. To create these cultures, a donor plate was taken and a 5mm hole punch was used to punch pieces out of the donor plate and put them onto our sterile media plates. This allows the fungus to grow into their substrate, pigment it, and it will depend on the nutrients available in that specific media type rather than as a reflection of a media of the donor plate. The 3 best performing media types were then brought on to part 2, where they were invented with white rotted delicious. This allows the fungi to colonize their native substrate. Once these had grown for 10 weeks, they were dried up, the plates ground up, and the pigment extracted. This is our final product. And from there, we can examine how best these media types produce pigments. Data collection for parts 1 and 2 were the same. They consisted of measuring the quality and color diameter using an acid sheet marked with 5mm boxes. This allows us to easily measure the area. As well, these plates were measured on a conical multichromator to give us the exact color of the plate in the LA color value. As well, the extracted media was also examined in this way and gave us the color value in the B. This allows us to map it on the CILAB color space. This is a standardized color chart that was developed in 1976 and is used in almost every industry today. It has values ranging from 0 to 100 across 3 axes: L for lightness, A for the red-green axis, and B for the yellow-blue axis. A difference in 2 or more corresponds to a difference in color that is detectable by the human eye. Starting off with part one, we tested 5 different types of malts, the conventional ones, wild honey, maple syrup, corn syrup, and coconut cream were pretty unconventional choices. These were selected for their range in pH, which we see at the bottom, ranging from 4.5 to 7, and for their low level of processing. Using sugar sources that are minimally processed is essential for maximizing their readability, as using processed sugar is not only means that the processing can affect the results that we're seeing, but it can also affect the ability for us to repeat this in the future if the process changes. We actually ran into this issue with works testing, where the original study that examined their growth used in orange juice only available in Aldi's in Germany. So we were not able to repeat it, as we do not have access to Aldi's German orange juice. Or something with a similar pH, raw honey was instead selected. A lot of these other choices, ranging all the way up to coconut cream, require 7 pH. And from there, we were able to inoculate them, measure their vegetation and quality growth. And after 8 weeks of growth, here's the phenotype. We speak quite a bit of variation across not only species, but across all the media types. Overall, honey was the most consistent. We can particularly see this on Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked. But did really like this. It tended to produce the whole range of its colors on this media, which is excellent for our research on color development. And then Scytalidium hugelyoverlooked performed very well at stability and consistency. Very close behind was malt. This produced excellent mycelium growth, particularly with Scytalidium hugelyoverlocked. It was practically pushing off the top of this lid. It was 7 out. However, the pigmentation was a little bit off target due to its higher pH being around 6. We'll see in Scytalidium hugelyoverlocked, it did more of a little bit off target, but still pretty good. Maple syrup also performed very, very consistently, though a little slow. It did not have the same growth and pigmentation rates after 8 weeks that honey and malts did after just 2 or 3 weeks. Though it still produced the pigments we were looking for, especially Ganoderma, which we were looking for that yellow pigment. Corn syrup performed pretty poorly across all metrics. It produced very, very sparse, very and the pigmentation was pretty inconsistent across species. Coconut cream performed really well, however, due to its high pH, it produced pigments that were on target. Particularly looking at Scytalidium hugelyoverlocked down in the bottom left, it produced a lot of blue rather than red. Overall, due to their high consistency as well as the pigments that they produced closer to the target. Honey, malt, and maple syrup ended up moving on to part 2. Here, 1 tablespoon of white rotted maple wood chips was added to plain meat and the hot media added over. This would allow our fungal cultures to grow into the wood, the native substrate that they have evolved to root. And it would also allow us to dry them out with black pigment. Our plain media is very, very inefficient when it comes to pigment extraction, due to the pigments getting locked up in the very thin texture of which is akin to that of like a dried up gummy candy, because that's kind of exactly what it is. And this would also allow us to grind it up into small pieces, which allows us to increase the surface area. After 10 weeks of growth, here's how they were looking. They look pretty good overall. They seem to really like it, especially the editor compliment. Hugelyoverlocked also did very good, but just didn't produce any pigment or mycelium on the honey or maple syrup for some reason. But on malt, we saw some good results. But we're not done yet. These plates were all opened, and for 48 hours, they were dried under a and once fully dried, they were ground up in a mortar vessel, added to 200 milliliter flasks with 100 milliliters of dichloromethane with a small stir bar and allowed to extract for 1 hour at 450 rotations per minute. After that, they were filtered through BWR 414 filter paper to remove impurities, and the color was examined. Starting off with Scytalidium hugelyoverlocked, here is how our pigment was looking to give us this data. And to map it out, here is what it looks like once placed into our color chart. Overall, honey produced the most intense pigment as well as the most consistent pigment. It performed very well in both parts 1 and 2 and gave us the target pigment that we were looking for. Malt produced some pretty good pigment too, but was very inconsistent. And with maple, it also was inconsistent. We saw inconsistencies between the two strains. It was much weaker on 4802 than on 11517, which indicates that there could be some inconsistencies in the way that these fungi are able to access the nutrients available in maple syrup. Now, overall, this is not really the media we're looking for, so honey ended up running out. But when we move on to Ganoderma from Mycology, our results were a little bit irrelevant. The pigment extracted looked like this, which gave us this data. I'm sure there's our color chart. It puts us about here. As we can see, the L value is very, very high, and the A and B values are close to 0. This indicates that it extracted no pigments. Potentially all of the pigment we are seeing is just from impurities or from discoloration caused by the actual substance itself. Though this did not produce the result we were looking for, it's still pretty useful information. As mentioned, neither of these pigments have been characterized. That means we don't actually know what they are. We don't know their properties, we don't know their structure, and we do not know the way that they interact with the solvent. We do know that it produced pigment. We can see that very clearly, especially on Ganoderma. Multiple plates produced extracellular that was excreted onto the top of these plates in this little hole. We know it's there, but we know it just is not interacting with this yet. The method was chosen for its ability to reliably extract pigments of Scytalidium Ganoderma from the antipodium in the past. Its intermediate polarity is what makes it such an excellent dissolver of natural pigments. The fact that neither of these produced any pigment in dichloromethane is remarkable, and combined with a dark color suggests that this might actually be melanin, rather than a lighter weight crystalline compound, as we expected from Scytalidium fucoideum. As well, Scytalidium Ganoderma did not produce the full range of colors. It produced red to orange to yellow, and then dark brown to black. This is pretty consistent with melanin too. The yellow corresponding to pheomelanin, and the brown and black corresponding to melanin. These are very commonly produced by fungi, and our current sources of natural melanin are pretty limited, so this could have some free-day implications for our ability to produce them. In fact, we already know that Scytalidium lignicola produces melanin. It's a dark septate endophyte, a type of fungus that colonizes the roots of plants and causes a dark root, where they excrete a large amount of melanin to produce dark color. While we did see that the pigment produced by Ganoderma was extractable in the past, it changing could suggest that there was some level of mutation. This is a pretty common issue that threatens with biological experiments, particularly when we are working with organisms that grow very fast and are able to mutate, such as fungi. This suggests that it may have changed at some point between our previous research and now, which brings up a lot of questions. It was unlikely that it was the media type, as malt was also used in previous experiments, and it has for years produced that much colors. Instead, it suggested maybe something related to the fungus itself. These unknowns of this experiment raise up a lot of opportunities for future research, particularly since this was not dissolvable in the skin. The big question now is, what will it actually dissolve in? Particularly if we use our standardized melanin extraction procedures and we are able to extract this pigment, it can help elucidate whether or not this is actually melanin. It can have really big implications for the production of fungal melanin, as previous experiments have used slower species to produce the same melanin, particularly if they're looking to produce pheomelanin, that yellow pigment which is fairly rare to produce from fungi. Also, looking at the purity of the extracted pigments can be very useful for our biotechnology applications. Shown on the right is the extracted pigments, the extracted crystals from Scytalidium fucoideum covered in residual sugars from its tiny media. While the sugars are dissolvable in water, and it can be easily washed away with just taking rinses, they are difficult to be fully removed. And examine whether these new types can have on types of sugars that are left on the residuals. Crystals can be really important when we're working with these crystals, these purified pigments in very low levels, very low concentrations, in settings where the purity has a really big effect. This is very useful for industrial applications and technology, as well as dye making, where the producer really needs to be able to control the concentration of purified pigment in their own solvent. I ran into a lot of challenges as to most biological experiments when I was going through these. The biggest one is contamination. It's a huge issue we face in the lab. And the most obvious answer is going to be fungi. It's not also a sterile lab. However, the biggest headache for us was actually dust mites. As you can see in this first image, these little lines at the top are dust mites crawling through our plates and farming bacteria or fungi that the bacteria have, including fungi from other plates that they have also crawled through and contaminated. They are very difficult to get rid of, and they are a persistent issue due to their small size. They're able to enter these petri plates through tears in the plastic sealing we add to them, which form due to old age, due to the building stretched too thin, or due to heat. That last one was a really, really big issue this past summer as the HVAC system in our was located was being replaced. It led to our lab with over 90 degrees at times, and it led to all of our filters opening, drying out, and becoming contaminated with lots of fungi, bacteria, and mites to their liking, and we had to replace all of them. This meant that the data I was supposed to collect in the summer was pushed back about 3 months, and pretty much all of our filters. It was a very, very timely endeavor. As well, all of the unexpected shutdowns that were associated with this made it difficult to know when exactly we'd be able to. This was a very troublesome for not only my research, but the many other students who are in this trying to get their experiments done. We definitely a big ladder at one of our labs as well as remnants of drywall and whatever else the things people love to be for us. Contamination is a particularly big issue for data, as it can lead to pretty substantial holes. Shown at the top right is my very first. I had all of my phenotypes laid out. This is data, and the grayed out boxes are contaminated plates that have been. These are particularly troublesome because contamination has a tendency not to show up until you are weeks into data collection. And if the number of contaminated plates outnumbers the extra plates that you made, it can lead to some pretty substantial holes. This doesn't invalidate data, it just makes it a little bit less reliable because you have fewer relevancy to base your conclusions on. Now that we've talked about how we produce them, the fungi themselves, let's look at what they're actually used for today, as well as first up is our application in art. These are patterns created by one of our basic students, Erica. She is currently working on application techniques that allows us to apply these pigments, which can be pretty troublesome on wood, which has a tendency to clean. And due to our lack of current use with extracted pigments, this being a very, very new technique. Her work studying different application methods, types of brushes, as well as application times can provide a lot of really valuable information to people who are looking to adopt spalted pigments. These are very sought after in art spaces, especially wood turners. Though the difficulty of use can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, so her work is really going to help speed up the adoption of this. As well, another pigment in development is a melanin. This is by our recent graduate Hayden, who has been working on extracting melanin from anti-melanins, the ear fungus or Malaria, the honey fungus, Armillaria milk, and the dead man's finger fungus, Xylaria polycarpa. These fungi were allowed to colonize their media, the melanin extracts, and then they're pitched right into the powder. This powder was combined with linseed oil to create an ink. They have been successfully used as a dip method with brushes and pens, and has been used for painting, as we can see, from a couple of different techniques. This research is still ongoing. It will be adopted by our current lab manager and our graduate student Ellis, who is going to work on concentrations to make these viable as a fountain ink, hopefully as a replacement for synthetic oxides, as well as natural melanin that's actively in other ways, such as like melanin. But I do not hear as much as a sentient. Now on to what I've actually been doing in the lab with these pigments. I've been working on purifying them before I went to research. This raw of pigments needs to be solidified and extracted from the solubilized pigment, as once the solvent is dissolved in these lower concentrations, it will stick to its substrate and become entirely unusable. This is great if it's on the substrate you want, but typically that glass vials that we store with, which is a little bit less desirable. To precipitate these crystals, I take a large volume, typically 1 to 2 liters, of our drama pigment in acid. Since it's a little bit less hazardous than ECM, I extract it through, or filter it through 4 to 10 filter paper, which has a particle retention rate of around 1 micron, very, very small, to help remove any contaminants. These are then evaporated in a rotary evaporator that spins the solvent around, creates a thin film of solvent that is then pulled through vacuum and recollected to majorly condense it. Once we do this, these pigments will start to form crystals as they are attaching to themselves rather than binding to the solvent. Once these crystals are precipitated, I extract them and remove them from the glass and filter them through BWR 415 filter paper. This allows the soluble pigment to filter through and the solid crystals to remain on the filter paper. These are dried, removed from the filter paper, rinsed, and then they are good to go for our biotechnology research, which we've been working a lot. As a bit of trivia, our former way of precipitating crystals was to flash our pigment in acetone with liquid nitrogen. Acetone has a freezing point of around -310 degrees Fahrenheit, and nitrogen has a boiling point of around -40 degrees Fahrenheit. If you've ever wondered what acetone freezing looks like, here it is. It was very, very cool, but I cannot miss Now, what are these used for? So as I mentioned, we are doing a lot of optoelectronic devices. These devices use thin films that are activated with laser, and they are used in things such as CNC machines to make precise cuts on your substrate. We actually got a grant from NASA recently to help with this research, and we're looking to continue working with the viability of this. In the middle, we see a really good example of the pH dependence of the color. On the left, we have our pigment solvent that is ranging from around 0 to 5 in pH, pretty acidic, or and when we get to around 9 to 10, it turns to be sheds and eventually once it is at 12 or higher, it becomes entirely purple. This is really important when we're working as like an effect the color that we the resulting laser is and the resulting device is. As well, on the bottom, we have the solidified pigment xylem from fluorophore, and that is used in as we see on the bottom right. That is one of those devices here is tiny, and they're very, very, very small amount of pigment, so it's very important because they're precise. We actually have a new paper from a conference, the SPPI Optoelectronics conference that was now. If you're interested in learning more about these devices, we're going to continue doing work on them as well as on the other projects I mentioned, so keep an eye out for our future work. I have really enjoyed my time in this lab. Now, unfortunately, due to my recent graduation, I am no longer part of it. Stay up, Spalting lab. you can follow us on Patreon. That is where a lot of our admins and coworkers are listening to this work. You can get exclusive updates on our research, as well as purchasing any of our fungi or pigments if you're interested. It's pretty easy. You just put fungi in a box with wood and water and then molds. Beautiful red. And you can also buy our extracted pigments if you're interested in trying this out. It really supports our work. It supports our undergraduate students or graduate students, as well as our international scholars. And it's gives you things like merch if you're interested. If you're interested in I would love to stay in touch with that. Please do. Feel free to take my contact. And please do connect with me on LinkedIn to reach my goal of 1 million LinkedIn connections. Especially anyone who is looking for members of their team or a new student in their lab and would love to join them as fun. Thank all of you first of all for coming. Thank you for your dedication to learning about fungi, especially with the incredible nature of fungi. I would also like to extend a thank you to my incredible guys and Robinson, who not only let me undertake this project out of the age of 19, where I almost never cultured any fungi in my entire life, but trusted me to manage their lab and believed it was going to really succeed here at a time when I didn't really know that I could succeed because I had never. I would also love to thank my wonderful lab who have not only supported my research development, but have also kept me safe in trials and tribulations of the Spalting lab as we have. Now, I was going to make them to me. Like drawing these, I was going to use them stuff for something there. And there's a very yeah, yeah. So the question for everyone here is, will the inks that we buy will specify what species of fungus is? Yes, we do. We do quite a bit of inside area too. So we are always producing more relevant products, and always looking for more inks. One of our best performing fungi from our experiments, more, and we always will specify exactly what it is or very closely with people who are looking to buy our pigments. So we can issue anything. We once had someone who wanted 1,200 plates of Scytalidium like mycology to turn his house blue. And we said, well, you're paying us to do it. And we did. So anything more that we can do, we'll. Yes, thank you.
So you were, you talked about lots of industrial applications, and I think one of the things about industrial applications of any pigment, right, is consistency. So that, like, I can have this shirt, but there's going to be, 50,000 of these shirts, and they all have to be the same color, or paint needs to be the same. Have you given much thought to how to make these pigments that you're able to create that consistent?
They're always going to be consistent with the same crystallization. What's very interesting about acidic drug is that when it's used solvent, it changes color to the reach saturation. After which it is always the same color, regular color of the crystal. And to increase the intensity, you will have to layer it. So it will always go down the same first how much is in there. You have or some crystals in there, and you need to be honest, so we're going to be the same as something that is really in the saturation plan. With things like Xylitol that might be a little so it can change the concentration, but it would just be up to using the same like color measurement standards that we use across most industries and study the concentration. You can also use the solid pigments and dilute it to whatever concentration you need. And that will allow you because these are crystalline pigments, they are very, very consistent. They're always really similar. And they are so to any kind of degradation, that we are going to stay that color. The example that I showed a little bit earlier that that pigment that was 400 years ago is as vibrant today as it was then. It will not degrade. That is an excellent starting point for these acid pigments. They are extremely resistant to UV degradation, and they do not fade over time, unlike those pigments. So it is fairly easy for us to control that.
We talked about next round. You mentioned a couple of things that curious about, are these for vast fluctuations?
I don't. So to repeat the question, are these able to be used on basketball?
Are they specifically for,
Yeah.
are they working with protein fibers? So,
Yeah, so we have tested them so far on cotton, wool, polyester, and nylon. So we will imagine on those like natural protein and then synthetic proteins have worked pretty well. Nylon is it's difficult with any dye because it's the way it is. Synthetics are hard to dye. But one of the benefits of working with it is that it easily binds to them, and particularly when they're binding fibers, they have been shown to create a uniformity crystal around fibers themselves. So they can stay adhered to that fabric for longer and resist bleaching, they can resist wobbling. So they've shown quite a bit of potential for helping to withstand our research into the application. So that would be it.
are they?
Yes, they are incredibly stable. They are very resistant to UV degradation because they are tested. They do not degrade. That is the reason they remain by this fungi and can survive UV degradation, which can get fat off their cells and you can break those down and hurt the fungi. So they are really beneficial for applications such as textiles, such as paints and stains, where we see that color fastness is really. Thank you for your question.
No words,
No warnings.
no water.
No, not the way that we apply them. We do have them in solvents. I will say acetone, dichloromethane are not in solvents. They are not good for you. You may know dichloromethane as heat stripper, which was recently banned by the EPA. So it's not worries. But acetone is pretty widely used in the US. Not so much in other countries. I told my artist makes one China that we use acetone in nail polish removers and for job box. She could not believe it. It is just not the same in other countries. So that is but in the solvent, you can just paint it directly on and it will bind to it. It'll just adhere straight to it. And you don't have issues with meeting like any kind of metal, any kind of other extractive afterwards. Like there are a lot of natural ingredients in development right now that I think are seeds. We do not use any of those because once that solvent evaporates, the crystals to
Would it burn them? Would it be able to burn wood and have somebody, the fumes would be toxic?
no, because the acetone does not stay in wood. So if we burned it, it would burn wood and you would not have wood anymore. But all of the solvent just evaporates right off. Which is nice about the solvents that we burn. Once it is 100% evaporated off, it will just be behind the crystals that are now stuck to the skin. Thank you for your question.